of DawgNation.com. So not having to go through like one of the typical platforms, you can actually go to DawgNation.com, see the show for today. In fact, why don't you try that experiment a little bit, and let's just kind of see how it goes. It's going to take us a little while to kind of, this is not an official unveiling. This is kind of a, what is it that they say in the restaurant industry? It's a little bit of a soft open for us on the DawgNation.com platform here. So watch the show live today from DawgNation.com. But this is obviously something we're looking forward to growing in a much more substantial way in the weeks to come. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Show today fun as well. Terence Edwards, a little bit of talk about the conflict that goes on, the emerging narrative of pressure on Georgia. And actually, I don't push back against some of that kind of stuff too much. I'll explain my position on this coming up. Also, a bunch of interesting stuff in the SEC, including a concept coming from Florida that, listen, I hate it on spec because it's Florida, but I do think it leads to a pretty interesting conversation. So we'll do all of that coming up. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by my good friends at Meriwether and Tharp, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Meriwether and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
We are coming up on a very significant week in the life of the SEC, the life cycle of the year-to-year news of the league. It is SEC Media Days. The media can't get enough of it. They are literally at the center of it all. Most fans don't really even know that it exists, at least the average casual fan on that. But it is one of those moments in which the narrative die is kind of cast for the upcoming season. And you can kind of tell on the basis of all the questions that get asked, kind of what the chatter around the league is going to be. And in some years, it's certain teams, and other years, it's other teams. And a team like Alabama is seemingly always at the center of all that discussion. But it is kind of an interesting thing for those of us who do this for a living to see how all of that's going to play out. Now, last year there was no SEC Media Days, so this year is a little bit of a return to normalcy in comparison to that, but you sort of get the impression, at least based on some of the recent stuff coming out of the league, this is not going to quite be a full-blown SEC Media Days. You know, I don't know that you're going to see, lobby at the hotel filled with fans cheering on their coach as they walk in. It's almost kind of like a de facto red carpet, the way that it all plays out. And I say that in the loosest terms possible, but there's a little bit of that vibe that goes on. You sort of get the impression that it's not going to be quite like that. You also get the impression there's not going to be anywhere near as much media there this time as has been there in the past. But there are still going to be narratives that must be discussed, and one of those apparently involves the University of Georgia. I'll give you an example of this, then I'll eventually give you some pushback to it from another media member. But Paul Feinbaum, obviously one of the chief talking heads of the SEC, made his weekly appearance on the Alabama radio station WJOX this week, and Paul was asked on the show, hey, what's the big talking point going to be around SEC Media Days? Well, what's everybody going to be talking about? And Feinbaum said, as I mentioned to you a moment ago, that it's kind of always Alabama. Can they repeat whatever else? They are the team, both seemingly literally and figuratively, at the center of the SEC. And yet Feinbaum said that actually there might be another talking point, even bigger than whatever said about Alabama, and this will obviously be relevant for Georgia fans. This is Feinbaum from WJOX.
In some ways, though, I think Georgia may be as big a story or bigger, because it's amazing to me, or maybe it shouldn't be amazing, how much pressure is building on Georgia and how much attention is being focused on Kirby Smart. You know, with a record like he has, it's still not enough for some of the people that sit behind these microphones and decide to put one of the most successful coaches in the country on the hot seat, theoretically, even though we all know that's not true.
So Paul Feinbaum says, hey, it's the pressure that's building on Georgia that's going to be, he predicts, maybe the biggest talking point of SEC Media Days when it takes place coming up in just a few days' time. Now, I'm going to circle back to this, but I want to give you a little bit of evidence of why maybe Feinbaum is saying that. And I'm not saying Feinbaum was thinking about this particular point when he said what he said, but as a way of pointing to more pressure that's, at least in the media sphere, that seems to be building around Georgia. Let me give you this. Matt Hayes is a longtime veteran college football writer. On one time, he was kind of like the national, like we had Bill Bender on SEC Country Live last week. The job that Bill has now is the job that Matt Hayes used to have at one point in time. Hayes was kind of one of these big national writers around college football, still writing a weekly piece for Saturday Down South. And he recently this week had his stock report for all the SEC's coaches. And believe it or not, now I don't want to get too lost in like the semantic game, kind of like the narrative device that a columnist likes to use. But in the stock down, trending down section of his piece, he actually put Georgia coach Kirby Smart. And I'll read you just a couple of seconds, or I should say a couple of sentences of what Matt Hayes, wrote about this. That he says that Georgia's trending down. He says it's not easy finding flaws in a coach who's played for the SEC title in 3 of the 5 seasons and is 44-9 over the past 4 years. Georgia won the SEC in 2017, but in an age where quarterback is the be-all, end-all, Smart has struggled to manage the position. So that's an example of some of that pressure that maybe Paul Feinbaum is noting building on Georgia, and Feinbaum predicts that will be a big topic of SEC Media Days next week. Now, let me give you 2 quick thoughts on this, and then I'm going to let you eventually hear from someone who pushes back against all of that. Here's thought number 1. On this show, we have totally rejected the notion that it's championship or bust for Georgia. The idea that there's some sort of timeline that's about to expire on Georgia if it doesn't win a national championship, that's clearly false. And as I've said before, that has a way of almost letting down Georgia's rivals, letting them off the hook a little too easy. This idea, well, if you can just vanquish Georgia this year, you won't have to worry about Kirby Smart and UGA anytime in the very near future. That's clearly untrue. It doesn't even make any logical sense, right? The notion that somehow the clock's going to run out on Kirby Smart, it's going to boil over and there's going to be some sort of, end game scenario that plays out if Kirby Smart doesn't win a championship this year. If not now, when? If not, those kind of like accelerated timelines we've pushed back on. That's just simply the media wanting to have something interesting to write about, talk about, whatever else. We've kind of pushed back against that. However, let me be a hardcore Georgia partisan for a moment, which I obviously am. Normally I have a Georgia shirt on. Today I kind of don't, but neutral colors, I guess, if nothing else. But let me be a hardcore Georgia partisan for a moment. As someone who loves Georgia, who cheers for Georgia every Saturday, who desperately wants Georgia to win all the games that it plays, this idea that Georgia might be at the center of SEC Media Days next week, as Feinbaum suggests, with the mounting pressure to win it all, backed up by guys like Matt Hayes, who've said, hey, listen, when you look at what Georgia's not done at the quarterback position, the way the program has trended down over the course of the last few seasons, the idea that there's a little bit of pressure building on Georgia, I actually don't count that as a bad thing. It's one of the things we love about the SEC, right? So to recap this, the idea that it's national championship or bust, that's nonsense. The idea that somehow the clock runs out on Kirby Smart if he doesn't win it this year, I think that's totally ridiculous. But the idea that Georgia is going to be at the center of the conversation and that the restlessness that some fans feel, because media takes its cue from the fans, a lot of the media who's talking about this, they're saying these things because they have had fans, either through email, tweets, phone calls to a radio show, whatever else, say that to them first. The college football narrative kind of works its way from the ground up, not really from the top down, although the ivory tower media folks would certainly like for that to be the opposite, but the facts are the facts. So in this particular case, if I'm a Georgia fan, I actually don't mind the idea that there's a little bit of pressure on Georgia because, to be very cliche for a moment, I apologize, a cliche warning coming at you here, no pressure, no diamonds, right? That good things happen because of the pressure to perform well. And it's one of the reasons why the SEC produces so many championships and has done so for such a long time, is that the comparative pressure, the way that Alabama's got pressure to win it every single year, but as it has success, all of a sudden folks at Auburn say, well, why aren't you winning that way? And then, Florida doing its thing. And, over the years, it's been Tennessee, LSU, Georgia's been in the mix for all that there as well. That the pressure that exists across the board in the SEC actually raises the level of performance for all the programs. So you actually, I think, if you're a Georgia fan, you want the best from Georgia. Having folks saying, all right, Georgia, tapping that watch, now's the time to get it done. In a weird way, I do think that potentially motivates Georgia to achieve even more than otherwise would. I think that's been proven out in the SEC for a long time there. That the pressure that exists around the league, the restlessness from fans, and Georgia does not have a monopoly on that. The rest of the SEC can get fairly restless as well if it's been more than a minute or two since a big win or a championship or anything like that. It may lead to a lower quality of life for the coaches who coach in this league, but I do think it actually pushes them to be better over the course of the long haul. And it's fair to point out that just because there's pressure on Georgia to win, that is in no way evidence of the fact that Georgia somehow is destined not to win, right? These aren't questions that get asked because Georgia's an underachieving team. These are questions that get asked because I think a lot of folks anticipate the fact that Georgia could actually be on the doorstep of some pretty phenomenal achievement, and the persistent questions of when does Georgia break through, the actual answer to that may be an emphatic answer for the positive from Kirby Smart and the Georgia Bulldogs maybe as soon as this year. And in fact, yesterday on SEC Country Live, we had Stephen Lasson. Now, a lot of you know I love preseason magazines, always something that I enjoy. Lasson is the editor for the Athlon Sports College Football Preview. And so he was with me on SEC Country Live yesterday, and I asked Stephen, I said, hey, what do you think about all this seeming mounting pressure that exists on Georgia? Where does that land with you, someone who kind of does preseason chatter for a living? And I thought Stephen Lasson gave an interesting answer. And if you're a Georgia fan, well, I think you're going to really like it. This is Lasson from SEC Country Live.
In the SEC, there's an insane amount of pressure on all the coaches in the SEC. But I actually think in this case, like, the perception kind of outweighs what's going on at Georgia. I mean, you can look at what Georgia has done in terms of recruiting. They may have the best roster in college football outside of Alabama. And you also look, too, this program has been right there on the doorstep of winning the national championship, made the playoffs. They've won the SEC. Really, the last hurdle is just to beat Alabama and win it all. So I don't really buy that there's this, crazy pressure on Kirby Smart that it's national championship or bust this year. I think it's just really a matter of time. Georgia is going to knock down that door and win a national championship sooner rather than later. There's just too much talent. There's just, Kirby Smart's one of the best coaches in college football. And I also think the addition of Todd Monken is kind of that missing piece. We saw this with LSU. If you want to get past Alabama, you've got to get that offense kind of be a little bit more explosive, be a little bit more open. And I think Todd Monken's that guy.
I said this on the show the other day that Kirby Smart has proven himself in a number of instances to be actually really good at vanquishing his critics and shutting down what appears to be a false narrative. And Stephen Lasson, I think, kind of touches on that with what he just says there. A lot of folks were like, Kirby Smart's not willing to change. Kirby Smart's incapable of changing. Yet the arrival of Todd Monken as offensive coordinator would seem to be an example of that not being true. And you saw flashes of that from Monken in year one. I think you see even an expanded version of that here in year two, that this is a Georgia offense that has all the recruits and all the talent you could want, and just missing, as Matt Hayes alluded to, even if it was somewhat ham-handedly, alluded to the lack of offensive explosion. All of a sudden, the presence of Todd Monken, as Stephen Lasson says there, may change even that. And yes, indeed, the Georgia fans who've been waiting patiently for that national championship to arrive, the evolution that's ongoing at Georgia, maybe being pushed by the pressure that just kind of naturally exists in the atmosphere, that may be what gets that done. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp, and glad to have you with us no matter how you get to us today. Live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and as a podcast, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Really glad to have you with us today. Big thanks to our friends at Merriweather and Tharp for making it all possible. They're your source for Georgia divorce. And listen, I know we always have a good time on the show. Sometimes that D word, divorce, can be one of those things that kind of brings it all to a screeching halt. Obviously, folks notice that because you've either experienced the pain of divorce yourself, you know someone who's gone through that. Unfortunately, you may be in the midst of that right now, or knowing someone close to you who's doing the very same thing. And we know the pain and anguish that can be a part of that. But here's what you can also learn there as well. That the work that gets done right now can actually set you up for more enjoyable next season of your life. And it's so important to take advantage of all of life's seasons. And that's what this process can provide for so many people. But it's important to have a advocate on your side, a tireless fighter, worker, someone who knows the intricacies of law, how they impact you specifically. That is what Merriweather and Tharp provides for you. They're your source for Georgia divorce. You can find them online theatlantadivorceteam.com, and they will just educate you about the process. The initial consultation is free. They also have like blog posts and podcasts and things like that that'll help you learn all about that there as well. So please check out my friends at Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Now, what's fun about Merriweather and Tharp, Bob, one of the partners there, Ashley, his wife, they're actually going to be with us as well for DogNation Invasion coming up. Now, I told you this yesterday, and I don't have like the specific countdown number, but as predicted, we are very, very close to being completely out of the DawgNation Invasion VIP tickets. For those of you who maybe have missed a couple shows, quick recap on all of this. We are going to be taking the DawgNation Invasion on the road to Charlotte for the upcoming season, and we've been selling tickets. DawgNation.com, the place to go to get your tickets. We have blown through all of our tailgate-only tickets for those folks going to be in Charlotte, and we have a few really exclusive VIP opportunities left. That means luxury motor coach from Atlanta to Charlotte on that Saturday morning, full tailgate that day. By the way, the bus completely stocked with beverages and things like that on the way down. So the party's actually rolling down the road to Charlotte there as well, if you get my drift on that. That's going to be a great time. Of course, it's hotel accommodations that night, that Saturday night there in Charlotte, and we're all coming back on the bus again there on that Sunday. So there are still a couple of VIP opportunities left to be involved with this, but I have been told that pretty much by tomorrow that's not going to be the case. So we're about to run out of these. Please secure your spot to get in there if you can. By the way, just go to the top of the page at DawgNation.com. The graphic to click on there in the top tab, it looks really cool. So check that out for yourself. And, of course, big thanks to our friends at the Finnish Long Drink, Merriweather and Tharp, Kroger, R.S. Andrews. These are folks that have been with us for a long time. They love a good Dog Nation party, and this is going to be a big one in Charlotte, getting ready for the Dogs in Clemson. So check that out, DawgNation.com. Still a chance to secure your spot on that. All right, very briefly and quickly here, I want to do an Around the Doghouse, and then we'll talk to our buddy Terence Edwards today on the program. And one of the things we've enjoyed as of late are some of these social media campaigns that have pushed 2022 recruits towards Georgia. We've seen the Delp is a dog. We talked about that the other day with Jeff Sintel. All the various Delp is a dog. Oscar Delp, of course, the great 2022 tight end, and the push by current Georgia players and recruits to kind of get him to be a part of that class. The latest example of this is going to be a fun one there as well. And I saw this from Jalen Walker, although Jordan Davis has tweeted this and a bunch of others there as well. For Travis Shaw, the five-star defensive tackle, also out of the state of North Carolina, the same state in which Walker hails. And, of course, Walker and Shaw are good friends. So this is going to be the latest campaign. My guess is you're going to start seeing a lot of this in the very near future. You see four-star linebacker commit Jalen Walker giving the hashtag Shaw Dog there. And I'll invite you to read the story that Jeff Sintel did with Jalen Walker the other day, talking about the visit that Shaw recently took to UGA and his feeling about that, and what seems to be a pretty big push by Georgia for Shaw that Shaw seems to be enjoying at the moment. And by the way, Shaw's not the only elite defensive tackle that Georgia's kind of in the mix with. We've talked before about Walter Nolan. Sort of feels like we'll be talking about that one a lot more there as well. So this is an example of kind of the creative stuff that was forced to be undertaken last year during the pandemic when there were no visits, and some of this carrying over even in a year like 2021 when there are visits. These semi-organic but certainly very fun social media campaigns, Georgia recruits, Georgia players pushing other recruits to join them at UGA. I think that's a really cool thing to be able to see, and I'm really, really happy to see Travis Shaw be the subject of all that right now. All right, it's great to have you here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp today. Before we're done, some very interesting stuff around the SEC, including a pretty radical idea coming out of Florida that, listen, around here we're going to kind of disagree with just because it's the Gators. But I do think it opens up an interesting conversation. So we'll do that before we're done. And for everything else happening around the world of UGA, no better voice to speak to all of that about than the great former Georgia wide receiver. He is Terence Edwards. He joins us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And great to have you with us as well.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Always great to have Terence Edwards here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. Certainly appreciate his time and the great things that he does for the football players of this state, helping train them up and getting them ready for that next level. And, of course, that performances on Friday night and everything else. We'll talk to him about that before we're done here on the show. Terence, thanks for making some time for us today. Really appreciate that. And as I said before, I certainly hope you're doing well.
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, B.A.
So let me start with this. And Terence, I like your opinion on this because I think of you as kind of a level-headed guy. You don't get too high, you don't get too low. You just kind of keep it, kind of in the middle, which is an appropriate mood to strike. And, fans talk a lot about pressure, and there's obviously a restlessness among UGA fans because this program obviously wants to break through and win a national championship. And sometimes the media notices that. I played some audio of Paul Feinbaum a little earlier talking about pressure building on Georgia, and that may be being a topic at SEC Media Days next week. And everything along those lines. Where do you kind of come down on that about, the fact that Georgia's been in the mix now for a number of years under Kirby Smart and still looking to break through in a big way? Obviously, a lot of fans think that's eventually going to happen, but until it does, it just seems like a natural fact that there's going to be a little bit of restlessness until that does indeed take place. Is that fair to say?
It's fair, and I think it's more of a fan's perspective than a in-house perspective. I know these guys are working their tails off to be the best players, be the best team they could be. And the goal every year is, especially when I was there, is to win the East first, then win the SEC championship, then get an opportunity to play for a national championship. So they're going to go and focus on their goals at hand. And I don't think anyone in that building, especially the players, maybe some coaches, but not the players, doesn't feel pressure to win a national championship, but that's their goal to win. I didn't go in there that building like, we got to win, or else. But we want to win, and we're working our tails off to win. But I think the pressure is more of a fan perspective than more of a player perspective. If that makes sense to you, B.A.
No, I think that's really smart. I think that's really well said. And I guess the question I'd also ask is, in the SEC, where if you're a wide receiver, defensive backs are working hard the entirety of the offseason because they all want to get the accolades that come from being great. Other receivers are working really hard to produce as many stats as they can. The other teams that you might be playing are working really hard. I've always been of the assumption that the cumulative pressure that kind of builds around the SEC actually makes individual players, teams better because, as you said, there's more internal pressure on the part of the players to be the best they can be than maybe external pressure of what's being pushed on them by fans, media, and everything else. But knowing that your rival, Florida or Auburn or whoever else, is working to be as good as it can be, doesn't that during the offseason maybe push you a little bit there as well, knowing that there are teams on your schedule that are going to challenge you to be the very best that you can possibly be?
Most definitely. I think the motivation comes from each player wanting to be the best player that they could be. That's the first and foremost. I think each player as a kid have had dreams of playing in the NFL, so selfishly they're thinking about themselves. How can I make myself better? And when you make yourself better, you make your team better. As long as you're doing it in the constraints of a team atmosphere, there's nothing wrong with a player saying, I want to be the best player I can be. In turn, that makes the team better. And they're also looking at, people around the SEC. They're looking at, I need to, as a receiver, I want to be better than Jabbar Gaffney or Taylor Jacobs. I want to be better than Cedric Wilson. I want to be better than those guys around the league. So I went in to push myself to be better than those guys.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of the same thing like the middle Georgia area where you kind of come from. So many good high school players coming out of there, so many good high school teams coming out of there. Sometimes you see that from a high school perspective there as well, that when you're around other good players, when your high school is near another high school that's kind of getting it done at a high level, and I know you've talked about, guys like Jacquez Green, others that kind of come from your part of the world, that proximity to other, successful players and successful teams has a way of being contagious, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, you just see, like growing up, I'm a real good friend with Peerless Price now. Before that, I watched those guys grow up and win national championships. As a kid, I wanted to be Peter Warrick, and now I'm really good friends with Peter Warrick. So those guys push you to be the best because you want to be and do what they have done. Peerless and Peter both won national championships, so you want to be able to, I can do the exact same thing. So you push yourself internally to be the best player that you can be, and if you be the best player that you could be, that is a cancer because now everybody's trying to be the best player that they can be. And if your best player on the team works as hard, then everyone else has to line up and line. I think that's what makes Tom Brady the best. He's not the best quarterback in my mind talent-wise, but he's the best player, and everyone aligns with him that makes the teams he's on better.
I think that's really interesting. Hey, one more thing on this topic, then we'll change the subject. I talked about SEC Media Days. I apologize for not remembering. You were a senior in 2002 at Georgia. Did you attend SEC Media Days that year? Did you have all those cameras and microphones in your face back then? As I said, I apologize for not remembering.
No, I didn't go. I think offense, John Stinscombe went, or David. And on defense, I think it was Tony or both. But I didn't go.
So, I mean, I'm sure a lot of players actually probably enjoy avoiding that because, let's face it, that's a lot to do in one day, having to go from room to room and have all those microphones in your face and cameras in your face and being asked a lot of questions. Of course, it's even bigger now than maybe would have been back then. I'm sure a lot of players were glad to let that responsibility fall with someone else, essentially having to give the same answer to the same question about 200 or 300 times over the course of a single day.
Oh, most definitely. And I think the right guy offensively would have been John Stinscombe to go and represent the offense for us. He is Georgia football. He is a brother of mine, so that was probably the best choice. And I can't remember if Tony or Boss went, but those two guys was the leader of the defense, and very well spoken, and those was probably the best choices we had to represent the Georgia Bulldogs at that time.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Let me change the subject here for a moment. This week we saw four-star wide receiver Kojo Antwi choose Ohio State instead of UGA, and listen, that was not necessarily unexpected news. It seems like Antwi had a good relationship with Brian Hartline, the Buckeyes wide receiver coach, for a while, and Ohio State typically does really good with wide receiver recruitment. But it does leave some fans kind of wondering, about the state of Georgia's wide receiver recruitment and how much of a destination this is for elite players. Now, sometimes these are guys that sign with Georgia out of high school, like Marcus Rosemy-Jackson or Justin Robinson or whoever else you want to mention, Jermaine Burton. Sometimes these are guys that go somewhere else originally and kind of veer back towards Georgia, like what's happening with Eric Gilbert right now. But, certainly in terms of collecting huge numbers of elite 4- and 5-star talent, it seems like Georgia has lagged behind the receiver position a bit in comparison to its recruitment of other positions. What do you think the perception is of the Georgia wide receiver spot by the kinds of elite recruits that you're working with on a daily basis?
Oh, it's just one thing. It's the offense that we run. It's nothing against a coach. It's nothing against the school. It's just, those guys want to put up numbers, and you go to other schools that have the tradition that we don't have at the position. Yes, you have me, you have AJ, you have Hines, but you just think about the Alabama room. I think it was the coach at Ole Miss now, the head coach changed the offense around.
Right.
Lane Kiffin, he changed the offense. I mean, you just think about the receivers before Lane Kiffin. Yes, you had Julio, but you can't really name another one that had in the last 10 years. He changed the offense around from a run and gun that was just like us. They was running back, you pounding the ball 3 yards in a cloud of dust. That was their offense. Played great defense. Lane Kiffin came in, changed that culture from a run, power running team to being able to throw the ball. And I think Monken is on that track. And once you see these guys, because they love Georgia, they love the school. They just now, as a receiver, they want to go to a place like Alabama, Ohio State that has a proven track record and show that they're, one, developing, which I think Georgia is developing players, but two, they want to put up the gaudy numbers that these other guys are being able to put up. So that's the perception that we have right now that I think we can kick. But you got to think, we had 3 receivers drafted 2 years ago. So Hank Tennant is doing a great job recruiting those guys. He had a great recruiting class 2 years ago. And I think he's finding players that he's developed, but I just think the fans is getting overly worried about that room because of what the success of Ohio State and Alabama has had the last few years. And I think Alabama has done the best. I mean, you have 5 first-rounders in the same room together. That is unheard of. I don't know if you'll ever see that again, but that is where Georgia fans would like to see us, and I think we will get there with the show that we will put on this year.
Let me finish with this. We've talked a little bit about NIL before, and now it's kind of here. You've seen a few deals struck for some of these players. What has been your reaction to the start of the NIL era thus far?
It's off and running. And as someone like myself, I'm enjoying seeing these guys being able to get their name, likeness, and image, being able to get compensated for that, because before, let's just be honest, when I signed that letter of intent when I played, basically Georgia owned everything about me. I couldn't capitalize off my God-given name. I couldn't capitalize off anything. Now these kids get to capitalize. It's fast and furious. But I just think that only the top guys would get the big money. And when I say big money, I don't know what it is. I saw a big quarterback from Miami get $20,000 for an endorsement deal. But I think it would calm down at some point, and people will realize that it's not as big of a deal that they're making it. But there are some issues, like we talked about last week, is the tax issue. Now, that is a real issue in my opinion, and these players are really going to be educated on that. I honestly believe every school should hire an in-house tax guy who can prep these kids and help them through this process.
I think that's really interesting. Terence, before we let you go, as I said when you joined us, you're doing great work as a wide receiver coach. You're coaching guys up. You've been working hard the entirety of the summer, and that's going to continue as we head towards the fall. Remind folks that they can get in touch with you if they want some of that specialized training that you can provide them.
Oh, you can find me on all social medias at Terence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy.
Terence, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for the great work that you're out there doing. Obviously, your insight on Georgia football, valuable for us there as well. We'll look forward to speaking to you soon.
Oh, thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Interesting stuff there from Terence Edwards. There's actually some new NIL news out there today around the SEC. We'll touch on some of that in a moment. Before that, let me remind you, my friends at the Finish Long Drink. I told you before, Finish Long Drink loves a great party, and they're going to be a part of the big party with us. DawgNation Invasion rolling on to Charlotte. Bus stocked up with that Finish Long Drink. Enjoying that on the way to the Queen City, and, of course, so much else there as well. And if you haven't tried this yet, you really need to. So many of you have tried it. It's now a staple that you're enjoying when you're at the pool or you're playing golf or whatever it is, fishing, whatever else you're doing here this summer. You know, it's a ready-to-drink cocktail. What that means is you pop the top on the can, you can drink it right out of the can, pour it into a glass, whatever else. It's a mixed drink that you don't have to mix. And listen, I'm all about making life more efficient and less work. And that's what the Finish Long Drink can provide for you. Been popular in Finland, starts in Helsinki back in the 1950s, back when the Summer Games were there, and been in the United States of America for the last couple of years, now in Georgia, or really wherever you are there as well. So check out thelongdrink.com. That's the website, thelongdrink.com. And you can learn more about where it is close to you, how you can get it. Try the cranberry, try the original, which is like the citrus flavor, the long drink strong, the long drink zero, all kinds of options. I love it. I like the strong liquor kick, I'm not going to lie to you, but I also like the citrus flavor. It's just a good, ready-to-drink cocktail right out of the can. You cannot beat that. The Finish Long Drink. Try that today. All right, speaking of players cashing in, at least to a degree, on their name, image, and likeness, I thought this was interesting. We talked about this on SEC Country Live yesterday. There is a barbecue joint in Fayetteville, Arkansas, Wright's Barbecue, that has given an NIL deal to kind of the collective Arkansas offensive line. Wright's Barbecue puts this out there, tags the players. They also gave you the hashtag BodyByBarbecue. I don't know that there's ever been a more apt description of me than that. My name, image, likeness. My likeness has been greatly influenced by BBQ. I'm a little bit more BBQ than NIL, to be honest with you. So good for Wright's Barbecue, kind of helping the Arkansas players cash in there on that. And there's a lot about NIL I don't really like. I'm not going to lie to you and pretend otherwise on that. I'm very suspicious of some of the cheerleaders in the media who seem to want, this to be even bigger. I have a lot of skepticism about some of that. I'm just a little bit of the old man on the porch about some of that kind of stuff. I don't mind telling you, but this is an example of how it can be fun, right? I mean, who doesn't like the idea of a collective offensive line around the SEC getting the, getting the barbecue deal together? I mean, that's something we can kind of all be behind and all be for. I just think that's kind of really fun all the way around. And I know some people reacted to what Charles Barkley said on SEC Country Live yesterday in regards to, there's being disharmony in the locker room on the basis of who gets what deal and who gets who doesn't, kind of get that thing, the hierarchy that gets established there. And some of you kind of mentioned that to me on Twitter. I don't necessarily agree with Sir Charles on that. I mean, I think players kind of already understand the ranking in terms of fame and all kinds of, prestige that comes from certain positions over the others. I don't necessarily think that's an issue, but it is probably a good thing for team chemistry. I won't deny that when the entirety of the offensive line is, recognized by a barbecue joint like this. It's kind of interesting stuff all the way around there. I also thought this was interesting. Pat Dooley is a longtime reporter covering the Florida Gators for the Gainesville Sun forever. Dooley was kind of the guy around the Florida program for forever, and I don't think he's really working full-time anymore. And, kind of the internet changes some of that anyway. But Dooley's been a guy around the Florida program forever. And in light of a story that has gained some prominence in recent days of there's being a push, and I say that pun intended, remembering the Bush push from back in the Reggie Bush era, some sort of push to restore Reggie Bush's Heisman Trophy. And this really kind of falls on the Heisman Trust. It's not an NCAA issue, but the idea that Bush would regain his Heisman Trophy status after that award was taken from him because of what was alleged as improper benefits while he was at USC. And so there's a chance this happens, because that's just kind of the way that things go, that Bush may get the Heisman Trophy back. So here's what Pat Dooley wrote on Twitter, and I thought this was interesting. He says, if the NCAA reinstates Reggie Bush so he can get his Heisman, shouldn't the SEC reinstate Florida's 84, 85, and 1990 SEC championship teams? Pat Dooley says he's asking for a friend. Now, first of all, if you've had 3 SEC titles taken away because of NCAA sanctions, then I feel like you got to look in the mirror, right? I mean, if there's a long list of SEC titles that were taken from you because of stuff that you were doing that was, at least at the time, coloring outside the lines, then you got probably an issue. Plus, he mentions the 85 title. Didn't Georgia beat Florida 24-3 in 1985? So I'm not even sure how much I'd even be bragging about that necessarily. But it does bring up an interesting point, that if we are now in the NIL era where players can, profit off their being, then all kinds of stuff from the past all of a sudden don't quite seem quite as scandalous now as they would have in the past. So there's a huge door that gets opened up by this. You give Bush the Heisman back, which I don't really care about one way or another. I mean, I've never been a believer that you could actually take an accomplishment from someone. Anyway, we all saw it. Same thing with like the Fab Five going to the Final Four and things like that. You can take the banners down, but you can't actually erase the accomplishment. So I've never really believed that kind of stuff was real anyway, although in Bush's case, he certainly believes it to be a real thing, and he's spoken out about it. But if you give Bush back the Heisman, a school like Florida says, okay, we are going to reclaim these SEC titles. And then a slightly different situation, think about Auburn in like 1993 that was, best team on the radio back at the time, not able to play games on TV, banned from postseason because of NCAA fractions. I wouldn't put it past those knuckleheads at Auburn to claim a national championship from 1993, right? I mean, all of a sudden all kinds of doors gets opened up. In fact, let me throw this out there for a moment. You tell me if this makes sense. So if Florida is going to claim SEC titles because of name, image, likeness, and Pat Dooley doesn't work for Florida, but I'm sure folks in Gainesville within the program are reading what he's writing there, then what's stopping a school like Georgia from saying that, hey, based on the current rules, it was improper to suspend Todd Gurley back in 2014. So therefore that loss to Florida in 2014, we're not going to officially claim that on our record anymore. I mean, Georgia and Florida have forever disagreed on the number of games that have been played between these two teams. Georgia could essentially say, we were forced to play that game without Todd Gurley, therefore that game is going to be considered a no contest. I mean, if that's the door that's getting opened up here, I think the teams should just push the envelope about, how they're going to reinterpret their past in light of the name, image, likeness era. So interesting stuff from Pat Dooley. I actually think that's a pretty good conversation starter, even if I am instinctively just going to mock anything the Gators say. Wes Rucker's a guy who covers Tennessee, writing recently for 24/7 Sports, had what I thought was a very interesting take on the Tennessee Vols, and it's probably worth considering here as well as one of Georgia's chief rivals in the SEC East. So this is Wes Rucker in no uncertain terms, laying it out there for Vols fans for what he expects to happen for this upcoming season. He says, I'm not sure Tennessee can be very good this season, which I think most Vols fans probably realize. And then Rucker goes on to say at 24/7 Sports, so Tennessee better be entertaining. It better keep people's attention. It better show people a glimmer of hope for the future. And I think for the most part, Rucker's probably right about that. I don't expect Tennessee to win very many games, certainly not bowl eligible. I think they could be in contention to be the worst team in the SEC here this year. But if they can be bad by scoring points, the fact of the matter is, fans are just more tolerant of high-scoring losses than they are low-scoring losses. They may pretend otherwise, but the truth is that's just kind of how the way that works out. That if the offensive-minded Heupel, who does have more experience than a guy like Shane Beamer, if he can score more points than him, score more points than Clark Lee at Vanderbilt, some of these other guys that are out there right now, if you are able to do that, then I do think that buys Heupel some time to maybe establish his program for starting in 2022. Kind of what some writers kind of call a year zero scenario. This maybe being that for Josh Heupel. The way to survive a year zero, to give yourself build a foundation for the future, is to score some points. And Heupel, because he was a good quarterback at Oklahoma and he was a successful offensive coordinator at Missouri, and he's at least got some head coaching experience, you'd think he has a chance to do that. I think Wes Rucker's words there are probably worth paying attention to. That might be a pretty good way to evaluate Heupel and Tennessee for the upcoming season. Very quickly, just because I think this is kind of funny, I saw where Eli Drinkwitz on Twitter called out one of his neighbors. So it's tough to be in the SEC, right? But maybe for Drinkwitz, it's actually tough to be in his own neighborhood, putting it on Twitter and tagging his wife. One of his own neighbors flying a South Carolina flag. Now, first of all, it's kind of interesting to see Drinkwitz there in Como, Columbia, Missouri, someone apparently from the other Columbia in South Carolina now living there. It takes a lot of guts to fly the South Carolina flag in Eli Drinkwitz's neighborhood, but that's apparently what one of Drinkwitz's neighbors was doing. I think that's actually pretty funny, and I think Eli Drinkwitz is actually a pretty entertaining guy. Speaking of SEC Media Days, this will be his first this year, given the fact that there wasn't one last year. I think that Drinkwitz might do pretty well in a format like that. I think folks probably will like him. Before we wrap up, let me also quickly give a shout-out to my friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia, solutions-based company. That means that they want to roll up their sleeves, do good work for you when it comes to your foundation, your waterproofing issues. You see the evidence around your house of the fact that you may have a concern there. Cracks in the foundation, cracks in the walls, water creeping in when it rains. Don't put that off. Get that taken care of today. Call the number. Just simply dial 678-ESOG now. It's very easy to remember. 678-ESOG now. That'll get you in touch with Engineered Solutions of Georgia. They're longtime friends of ours here on DawgNation Daily. They are proud partners of UGA there as well. It makes them fun to do business with, but they've got 2 full-time engineers on staff there as well. They'll do good work for you for your foundation and your waterproofing issues. All right, we have a very good golden shoe today, and I want to make sure I give this due respect because this took a lot of work. Our buddy Seth Rhodes has actually won one of these already this week. This may be his magnum opus, if you will. Can we show this on the screen here for a moment? Now, listen, you have me at hello when you go Star Wars references, but Seth writes on Twitter, I had to do a little something with football season upcoming. So on the left side of the screen, for those of you not watching radio podcast, it's the scene from episode 6 in Return of the Jedi with Jabba the Hutt as the Florida Gators, with Georgia as Princess Leia. Actually, this may be the most scandalous thing we've done on DawgNation Daily with the scantily clad Leia there on the screen. But Georgia is Leia. But then Seth has got 2021 Leia choking Jabba the Hutt, which is the Florida Gators. That is very funny from Seth. That is very creative. A very worthy golden shoe winner here for today. By the way, Gator Hater Countdown, how about 114 days? We'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. Yes, so Seth absolutely killed it with the golden shoe here today. There's no better way to my heart than combining Georgia football and Star Wars. Somehow I think that Seth sort of knew that, so he goes straight to the front of the line for all of that. So that is great stuff to be able to see. Really, really enjoyable all the way around. All right, let's take some comments, and I'm going to be back here on the laptop for the first time in a while on comments, which y'all don't really care about, but let's do this. Actually, let me just do this. That's ridiculous. I'll do the phone for Facebook. Or over here on Facebook here for a moment. And I'll do some YouTubes here in a moment. Tim Tatum says, great minds. Nick Roundtree says anything with Princess Leia is fine by me. Yeah, that was quite a powerful cinematic moment for a young boy. I'll just say that for sure. Jermaine King also enjoying that there as well. Somebody joking about Brandon Turnage turning around the Tennessee program. I think we all would probably say that's probably unlikely to happen. Jimmy Durham says, will DawgNation Daily cover media days with live reports? Here's the honest truth, is that in some form or fashion, DawgNation's going to be at SEC Media Days. We were there the last time in 2019. It is not certain that we're going to be there this time around. In fact, there's a very good chance that our buddy Mike Griffith will be there for the entire thing, and there's a chance we may only be there for part of it, or we may not be there at all. So as of this point, I don't really know. Last year I only went up for the last time it existed, I only went up for one day. So if I was there, I'd probably only be there for a day. Mike will probably be there for more than one day. So there will be live coverage from SEC Media Days. There is a chance, though, it's not DawgNation Daily. I certainly won't be there for the entire time. I know that for a fact. Calvin Sanders predicting that Turnage will be on the move again. Maybe not. Maybe he'll go up there and find himself a home. Brandon Ray predicts that JT and company blow out Clemson. That could certainly happen. I mean, actually, if that did happen, that'd be a pretty amazing performance. But it is kind of a cool thing for UGA to have that measuring stick at the very beginning of the season. You don't have to wait very long to find out how good you truly are. That's what that game provides for you, for sure. I'm going to pull up these YouTube comments, get some of those going here a little bit too. Sam Burke says, how much of the perceived recruiting issues is a result of the coaches finally being able to get their eyes on players in person and reevaluating them? I think that's an interesting point, Sam. First of all, I think most people who follow Georgia recruiting pretty closely know that UGA is still in line for an elite recruiting class. It's just a matter of which names actually form that class. But your point about evaluations, I do think is an interesting one. And I think it may take a while to see how this plays out. But I am generally of the belief that the recruiting industry does a pretty good job of ranking players. That if you can cite individual examples where they may have gotten it way wrong. And you may see examples, and this would actually be kind of a fun thing to do on kind of a neutral basis, where one of the main industry players had a guy rated very high, another, of the main industry players had that guy rated a little lower. And it'd be interesting to kind of do some of those cross comparisons over time of who got it more right, one with the other. I'm almost not so much interested, though, in the individual player ratings. I'm interested in the populations, who gets grouped in that 5-star category, who gets grouped in that 4-star category. When you evaluate the recruiting industry on the basis of how it combines populations, I think the industry does really, really well. But part of the mechanism that the industry uses for that are these recruiting events and open practices and, easy travel to games and things like that. And this past year, there just has not been. In some cases, there are some players who didn't play at all. Other players who played in the spring, and then other players. So I do think that for a little while, you're going to see some haywire and some maybe less accuracy in some of the player ratings. And so the easiest narrative to spin in all of college football is, well, everybody else may think he's a 4-star, but Georgia believes, or I should say a 3-star, but Georgia believes he's a lot better than that. This is the guy that Georgia had targeted as the number one, blah, blah, blah on their board. That's always a very easy narrative to spin. There's a way of spinning recruiting news that nobody ever loses, that everybody always gets the 25 guys they truly wanted. And I kind of roll my eyes at that a little bit. But to go back to the commenter's point, and I know I'm going long on this, but we may be in a time now because of the lack of face-to-face, hands-on evaluation. That's just now becoming a thing again. We may see an example of some inaccurate recruiting rankings and maybe even some coaches who inaccurately assess players because they just haven't had as much face-to-face contact with them, true evaluation of them. Or what's probably more likely to be true is, they haven't seen a guy in 2 years. He shows up, all of a sudden he's 6 inches taller, 20 pounds heavier, rocked up. A lot of these coaches may be playing catch-up with just how good some of these prospects truly are. Mike Tiffany says this year's roster shows how off player ratings can be. No way D-Rob was a 5-star number one receiver in the country, just like there's no way Jordan Davis is only a 3-star talent. So, Mike, I understand where you're coming from on that, but I think that here's the thing you got to bake into that discussion. And this is really important to me, Mike. So let's say wide receiver X was a 5-star. There is still about a 50% chance that a 5-star is going to fail. Now, you can say, well, that just means he wasn't a 5-star, but that's not quite the way that really works out. I mean, look at the NFL GMs who draft the NFL draft. The guys they take in the first round of the NFL draft, there is about a 50% chance of that player just not panning out at the NFL level, never really starting any kind of games of consequence. And in retrospect, you say, well, that means that player shouldn't have been drafted in the first round. But the point is, there's no way of knowing that going into it. That that when you see the category of 5-star recruits or the category of first-round level players once they're ready to move on to the NFL, there's really very little way of knowing in that room at that time, who from this group is going to pan out and not. There is some failure rate that has to be baked in the conversation. And you'll say in the case, you use D-Rob as an example of this. Well, they should have known that D-Rob wasn't going to be big enough to get off press coverage in the SEC. They should have known that. He shouldn't have been a 5-star for that very reason. But the truth is, at the time, I think what the assumption would have been is the elite speed that D-Rob had would have overcome that for him. And there are examples of that. I mean, someone like Jalen Waddle, wasn't a 5-star recruit. He's a very highly rated recruit. But this is a guy whose speed has overcome his size limitations. Sometimes you do see that, and sometimes it ends up, being the opposite issue. But I think the point is, even in the category of 5-stars, you have to assume there's a little bit of a failure rate baked into the discussion. In the case of Jordan Davis, maybe that was Georgia just doing an elite scouting report of knowing he was better than most people thought he was. I think Georgia certainly deserves some credit for that. But much the same way, there is a failure rate baked into the 5-star discussion because the population of 3-star recruits is so big. There's going to be a few lottery winners in that 3-star population, that there are going to be some elite players emerge out of the 3-star world because there are just so many 3-star prospects. And so, some of that is just the basic world of, I guess, stats, I guess. Jay Shipe says, looking forward to the opening kickoff game next year playing Oregon. With us being national champs, we have to get this game day stigma behind us because they will be at a lot of our games over the course of the next 10 years. So Jay, feeling pretty good today. I like to hear the thought of that. And I do think it's interesting. Georgia has such a big season opener this year against Clemson. Playing Oregon next year is a pretty big deal there as well. I'm glad he brings that up. Frank Patterson says, if we buy a ticket to the tailgate, we'll be able to stay and watch the game at the tailgate. Yes, Frank, you will. The TVs will be on during the game. That is my understanding about that. Yes, sir. I'm glad you asked. Nature Gator talking about some of the Florida guys who were lower recruits who became big draft picks, weighing in on that. Scott Harris says, when does practice start? Georgia typically starts its practices at the very end of July, and it's one of those, it's not a date that's necessarily known right now. It'll eventually get leaked out or eventually get announced, but generally speaking, at the end of this month is usually when those practices start, and then that first Saturday in August is usually a time, around that time anyway, where there'll be a big press conference, kind of a kickoff to start the practices, and then we're kind of in sort of a season mode after that. But I would say that within the next 2 weeks, you'll probably hear an announcement about Georgia practice starting July the 20, blah, 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 or something along those lines. And, generally by first Saturday in August, you're kind of in press conference mode and you're starting to hear things leak out about practices and things like that. So you don't have to endure too much longer before you start getting some true classic, practice talk coming here. Jim McLaughlin says, how can we possibly lose a big target to Southern Cal? Yeah, I mean, I don't know. In the case of Mikael Williams, it's difficult to say there. And once again, this is an easy narrative to spin. And so I try to be careful not to do too much of this because it's hard to sometimes truly know. But, was this a reprioritization of the Georgia board? Was this a case of Williams just falling in love with what happened in L.A.? I think there's a lot that could have potentially been the case there. But, I mean, you can go back and connect some of the dots on this, and you see less Williams-Georgia chatter leading up to his announcement of USC. And that's not me, dunking on the kid and saying Georgia didn't want him. I really try to go out of my way not to do that kind of stuff because it's just so self-serving, or it has the potential of being so self-serving. But in this case, it seemed like that Georgia-Williams relationship had kind of gone a little more quiet prior to that pledge to USC. Frank Patterson has now taken to calling Branson Robinson Branson Chubb, which I think is really pretty interesting. Schuler Thomas says Peach County's got a new high school football stadium. No, I'd love to see that. I'm sure it's a good one. A lot of good players obviously play there in Fort Valley. So that's good stuff all the way around. Frank Patterson says it's a damn shame that Will Shipley has to start his career 0-1, which is very funny. Very funny. Nature Gator says all teams have 2 and 3 stars that turn out better than 5 stars and go to the NFL, while the 5 stars go to work at wherever. But you win college championships by recruiting a majority of 4 and 5 stars. Nature's actually 100% right about that. That you can cite all kinds of counter examples to the prevailing, narrative, but ultimately it is that collection of elite talent that puts you in the category of being able to win a national championship. Without that, you're not going to get that done. And you still see some resistance to that idea in kind of what I think of as the mainstream media, the media that doesn't follow the recruiting news quite as closely. For instance, we played, ludicrous audio the other day of Heather Dinich predicting Iowa State to make the college football playoff because Matt Campbell's ability to coach up 3 stars. There are going to be individual instances when a 3-star outperforms his recruiting ranking, but the idea that a coach is going to take a roster of mostly 3-star players and beat a roster of majority 4 and 5-star players, that is literally a myth. I mean, it's mysticism. It has no bearing on reality whatsoever. This is actually working out pretty well. So I've got the comments on YouTube on my laptop, and I've got the Facebook phone pulled up. That's actually working out pretty well. Bill Kelly says that talent does not equate to success. I simply don't agree with that. You can cite, as I said before, counterexamples when talent maybe hasn't worked out, but there is a reason that the teams that hoard all the national championships are also the teams that hoard the most recruits. That's just a reason. Philip Jordan Wells also giving you a Peach County shout-out over here. You love to see that. Matt Rugavina pointing out Florida suffering a lot of blowout bowl game losses. That's kind of interesting to think about. A couple of more, then we've got to get ready to go. Calvin Sanders laughing about the idea of Iowa State. Pete Williams says, I think it's essential to get 1 or 2 good transfer players to keep your team up to par with other teams. I think that's right. In fact, let me try to make a somewhat abstract point about this. Like, there's a reason why NBA teams want players to go to college for at least a year, because they want that extra year of evaluation before they draft them. That if the NBA was forced to sort of sift through the 18-year-olds and decide who's worthy of that league, you saw this back in the era when high school guys could get drafted. There were obvious Kevin Garnett's and Kobe Bryant's and LeBron James who you knew were ready right away, but there were a lot of high school guys that got drafted that weren't, kind of weren't ready. That when you have another year to evaluate them, you just make better choices about, who should be picked and who shouldn't. I think the same thing is true when it comes to the transfer portal. We can joke about, Florida overutilizing the portal to make up for some of their recruiting misses, but it's really, really hard to have a great scouting system and to have a great recruiting apparatus. Some guys are going to either slip through the cracks, or in some cases you are just going to misevaluate. Like, there is no such thing as a perfect record in terms of player evaluations. Even the smartest folks in football will occasionally just get it wrong. So what the transfer portal provides is a chance to have a second chance to get it right if you maybe got it wrong the first time. And that's a pretty valuable thing. Now, I think overutilization of that is inefficient over time because you have to re-recruit the same positions year after year after year. Eventually that's going to be draining energy from the program. But as the commenter said, 1 or 2 transfers every year at key positions, being somewhat position specific with how you try to utilize the portal, I think that's a pretty valuable way to build your roster. And I wouldn't want to do it exclusively, but I wouldn't want to avoid it completely either. Hugh Nash checking out. Hugh, thanks for being here. Oh, by the way, so Hugh's wife, Megan's celebrating a birthday. So Megan, happy birthday. And Hugh says he outkicked his coverage, and I'm certainly assuming that's true. So Megan, happy birthday to you, and certainly, Hugh, appreciate you spending some of that time with us here on the show today. Good stuff. Let's see what else. Kevin Mills asked if SVP starts over Erickson. Seems like a more athletic Matt Luke type of player. I think Van Pron's going to be hard to keep off the field for the entirety of the season, but certainly for now, I would assume that Erickson has a little bit of an edge over Van Pron. That's just my best guess on that. I may be wrong, but I sort of get the impression that Erickson's on his way to being starter at center, and you may see Van Pran be kind of that super sub at that center, both guard positions. He may be one of those guys that plays multiple positions for Georgia and plays a lot. I think that he's in line for playing time, but Erickson, because of his experience, may be ahead of him on that, on that sort of hierarchy a little bit. Daniel Aldrich asks, how old is DawgNation? We started the summer ahead of the 2015 season. I started DawgNation Daily August of 2015, the week of Georgia's first game there that year, which was, again, who did Georgia play the first week of the 2015 season? I can't even remember anymore. DawgNation was around, and DawgNation Daily was around for the last year of Mark Richt. And then, I would say that in a lot of ways the site really took off in a big way around the coaching change with Kirby Smart. That's when I think DawgNation was big to begin with. DawgNation Daily, thankfully, found an audience pretty quickly there as well. But, things really expanded in that transition, the start of the Kirby Smart era. But we've been around since the 2015 season. Phil Rogers asks who takes Chuck's place in the sidelines. If I had to guess, they'll go former player for that. I think they have a couple of guys in mind, but I think they're going to go former player on that. Over here on YouTube, Jay Shipes, very funny stuff. DMart42 says SVP versus Erickson is the classic experience versus talent debate that keeps our line from being great. I wouldn't sell Erickson too short on that. If that's where I think you're going with that, I wouldn't sell that too short. I wouldn't sell Erickson too short on that conversation, and I wouldn't assume that somehow Erickson's going to be a block on SVP getting a chance to play. I think he's going to have plenty of chances for that there as well. Worm predicts LSU to surprise. They'll certainly be one of those teams that has a chance to do that after what was a disappointing season in 2020. Christopher Rule says Dogs on a vengeance tour again in 2021. I like the idea of that. He says there's payback coming, certainly for a Florida team for sure. Ron Warbington says, are we doing the post-game show with Terence Edwards this season? That's certainly my hope, and I believe that's Terrence's plans there as well. I'd certainly like to be able to do that. But that's the anticipation for sure. We'll definitely be doing a post-game show, and I'm thinking it'll be with Terence again, so I'm looking forward to that. Philip Jordan Wells says 2017 was a wild year here. Yeah, we had a great time back then. Lucy Bowers-Boykin asking about the Get Back coach. Is that Scott Sinclair? Is that a Sinclair job, I think? Lucy also asking what I did before DawgNation. So prior to DawgNation, I worked for an Atlanta radio station. I'd done some Atlanta radio stuff. I did some local TV stuff. I just kind of bounced around and did a lot of that different kind of stuff for a while, mostly in traditional radio and TV. Years ago, I'd done some high school football games, some things like that. And so just kind of bounced around and did a lot, between high school football games, local TV, a couple of different radio stations. That was kind of my world prior to all that. In fact, for the first year of DawgNation, I actually did double duty at the radio station where I was working and at DawgNation. And then after that, I kind of moved over here full time. Lynn Johnson Shipman also asking about SEC Country Live. So, yeah, Mike Johnson, the guy I used to work with on SEC Country Live, he's now coaching. He's doing a great job. I think he's a real rising star in the coaching ranks. And so we're actually back doing SEC Country Live again every Wednesday now. But Mike is not able to be with us because, as I said before, he's very busy in that coaching world now. And I think he's going to be a very, very good coach. Frank Patterson, I like the idea of that, Frank. I like the idea of that. Jay Parker says if the playoffs expand, the NFL should be asked to draft rounds 1 through 3 prior to the playoffs. Financially protects players from increased injury risk. That's an interesting idea. Green Soldier says, this is an interesting question. He says, has there ever been another head coach who's had to face the national champion or the runner-up in 4 out of 5 seasons? If not, it puts into context how big the challenge is for Smart. And I think that Green Soldier is right about that. That Georgia's path to the playoff, and I know if you're not a Georgia fan, this sounds like excuse-making, but in this case, I do believe it's actually true. Georgia's path to the playoff is just more rigorous than the average team. In fact, we kind of talked about this last week in regards to something that Bill Bender from the Sporting News had said on SEC Country Live, that you rank teams like, or I should say coaches like Brian Kelly or Lincoln Riley ahead of Kirby Smart on the pecking order of top coaches because of their multiple trips to the playoff. But as Green Soldier's alluding to, if you're Lincoln Riley in the Big 12, you don't have to play a lot of those same teams. And certainly Notre Dame, out of the kind of typical independent ranks, although last year they made the playoff as an ACC team, they get to avoid a lot of that same kind of stuff. That the perception of Georgia, I do believe, would be totally different if Georgia was playing a schedule scenario different than what it's playing. When you have to play 2019 LSU and 2020 Alabama and teams like that. And I said before, if you're not a Georgia fan, that comes across as a total excuse. Completely acknowledge all of that. But Georgia has been in an interesting position of kind of being that second best team in the SEC, fifth best team in the country scenario multiple times here, and that can be kind of a challenging spot. So interesting stuff all the way around. Christopher Rules, thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate that. Jarvis Hanna checking in here today there as well. Thank you all for making all this so much fun. By the way, make sure you check out the Atlanta Journal-Constitution online at ajc.com. Always really important to keep up with what's happening in the world. It's not always good news, but it's always certainly interesting news for kind of how the world looks right now. Obviously, sports stuff there as well with the the Braves and interesting reporting from our buddy Chip Towers on some contract extensions for some Georgia assistants. Chip reporting today that Trey Scott and Glenn Schumann and Matt Luke all got extensions. No details on the salary on that, but interesting reporting there. So check out the work that Chip's doing there at ajc.com and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. It's good stuff there too. So thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. Also, big thanks to our friends at R.S. Andrews for making the R.S. Andrews cool down possible. They'll take care of you. If you're air conditioning, that tired unit that's been around too long, you know it's past its shelf life. If you're worried it won't make its way through the summer that's still on its way, check out R.S. Andrews online at rsandrews.com. They will take good care of you. Find them today, rsandrews.com. I'll see you tomorrow, 10 a.m., DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. We'll look forward to talking to you then, everybody.